country, and our winemakers in South Africa are in the evening over in South Africa. And I think this is just amazing using Zoom that we can connect our members to the winemakers in this way, but even more so than before the pandemic and when we were all forced to be online. This has really gotten us very good at doing these Zoom calls, and we've done a lot. And thank you, Anais from head office, for arranging these and for being our operator. It's really helpful so that we can concentrate on the information that we're providing you. So I'm Michael Utzman, one of the co-managing directors of Opinion, along with Greg Reinhardt. And today we're talking about the South African piece of Cellar 281, which hopefully all of you have received your physical copies. Canada Post has been a little spotty this time, so we've had a few people. We do keep some extras to mail out when we can, but with COVID, it's been difficult for the staff to go into the office to do that sort of thing. So we have 4 of them with us this afternoon. We've got Nick from Groote, we've got Corlea from Bosman, we've got Richard from Richard Kershaw, and we've got Mike Ratcliffe from Vilafonté. So I'm looking forward to hearing from all of them. You didn't come here to listen to me, so I'm not going to talk any longer, and I will introduce Nick Pentz from Groote. We visited him very recently in South Africa when Opinion went over, and he visited us just a year ago. We went across the country together and got to meet a lot of Opinion members. So thank you, Opinion members, for joining us. Thank you, Nick, for taking the time, and over to you, sir. Cheers.
Great, Michael. Yes, thank you very much for the introduction. Thanks, Michael, Greg, and Anais. Thank you for putting us all together. Wonderful to be able to chat this evening, our time and your time afternoon, to your members over in Canada. This time last year, I was actually in Ottawa doing an event, -8 degrees Celsius. I had a wonderful tour of Canada that Anais put together for me, starting out in St. John's in the east and ending up in Kelowna. 12 flights in all. I must say, January in Canada is a challenge, very much so. Yeah, 12 flights, 2 cancelled flights, 4 on time and 6 delayed. So that was pretty challenging, but great fun. Wonderful to see your country, and I'd love to be back in the summertime again sometime. Yeah, the sunny South Africa at the moment. As you can see in this wonderful background shot of Groote up in the Darling Hills, taken at sunset, right up at 500 meters above sea level, about 7 kilometers from the cold Atlantic. So an absolutely stunning spot for wine growing. We've also obviously been affected by the COVID lockdowns. We're into what we call our level 3 at the moment, where yeah, there's certain limitations in place, but the most severe of that, though, for us is that we can't sell wine in South Africa. We are allowed to export, though, so I can assure you that your orders will not be delayed in any way. You know, we're the Pentz family. I'm a 10th generation in South Africa, out of Germany. I'm a 4th generation farmer, coming from a dairy farming background, actually, and not wine. Before democracy in '94, there were quotas that owned our wine industry, and it was pretty well regulated as to where you could produce wine and how much wine you could produce. So we're from a dairy farming background. It's wonderful to have 3 generations on the farm at the moment. My dad, who is he's a true-blooded stockman. He was Farmer of the Year in 1998 for his dairy farming. Peter Senior, and then my son, also Peter, joined us, actually, interestingly, about a month before the big lockdown in March. So he's bringing a lot of excitement to the company as far as marketing is concerned, and social media. We were dairy farming in Cape Town right up until into the 90s, late 90s. My grandfather bought Groote in 1972 as a dairy farm, and yeah, my dad and grandpa kind of figured that they'd have to move out of the city at some stage. So Groote situated an hour up the west coast from Cape Town. Was a fine spot for my dad and grandpa's dairy cattle. Cool climate, close to the cold Atlantic, which benefits dairy because cows don't get hot and bothered. They can happily produce their milk. And then when the quotas and democracy came around in the early 90s, that sort of gave us scope to start planting vineyards at Groote. And it's been an exciting journey. We started planting our first vineyards in 93. To date, we've planted 124 hectares of vines at Groote. And we actually only started making wine in 1999. Our first grapes were sold on to other wineries. We had an experimental batch of wine made in 98, which was really, really standout. And that encouraged us to actually build our winery. We restored an old fort on the property, a 17th century fort, a fortification. And that became the home of Groote Wines. In fact, Neil Ellis had been producing really great Sauvignon Blanc right on our doorstep since the mid-80s. And that really encouraged us that we knew that Sauvignon Blanc was something that did really, really well out of Darling. And certainly from day one, that's been our calling card. And we, either as blends or as single wines, we now do 3 Sauvignon Blancs. We've expanded our range to 13 different wines. We do sparkling wine, we do red and white, we do blends. And it's a great honor to be able to bring 7 of those wines to you throughout the premium offering. And they sort of cover the spectrum from easy drinking to more serious wines. But really great to have those wines on the offering. And thanks to Premium for the invitation to be part of the company and to be able to supply to your members. I think we started about 4 years ago. The farm is a 3,000 hectare property. Not all the ground is suited to vineyards, and obviously the vineyards are on the more sort of clay-rich soils, the higher slopes sort of from 200 to 500 meters above sea level. All predominantly south-facing slopes, so cool slopes. And we have huge benefit from the cold Atlantic with a longer ripening. Vineyards just 5 kilometers inland from us actually pick their Sauvignon Blanc about 3 weeks before we do, purely because of the higher temperatures and the quicker ripening. So we have a mixed farming setup across the 3,000 hectares. Sort of lower down on the property, we do cropping, wheat and canola. True to my dad, we've still got a lot of cattle, no longer dairy cattle, but we've got Angus beef cattle. We've got quite a bit of sheep. And then we've got a big antelope camp as well, where we run 8 different types of antelope. So we make use of all the different soil types on the property, as I say, from the hills where the vineyards are, right down to the more sandier areas. The farm goes back 300 years to the period when the Dutch were trading between Europe and the East to go and fetch spices. So the name Groote is actually a Dutch name meaning the big outpost. And yeah, we chose the bell as our symbol for our wines because when bells ring, it brings people together for all sorts of different things, for matrimony, religion, work, and of course, drinking a good glass of wine. So a lot of history on the property, a lot of interesting characters that we've had across the years, like Hildegonde Duckett, who our restaurant is named after. She was well known for her cookbooks that she wrote in the 1800s. Lord Charles Somerset, the governor of the Cape, used to use the farm as his hunting lodge. So a wonderful farm to visit. Wine to me at the end of the day is an experiential product. You need to be able to come and visit. We welcome visitors from around the world. We've got a wonderful farm drive safari that you can go on and see the antelope. We've got a restaurant. We've got a month-end market where we have 60 different stalls. That's taken a little bit of a backstage at the moment with COVID, but we're hoping to start that up again. Then obviously wine tasting in the old buildings and in the barrel cellar. Just to get onto the wines, to give you a little bit more information, the Old Man's Blend Red and White is in your offering. Those two are really really good, accessible wines. They drink well at a young age. They pay tribute to my father, who us children affectionately refer to as the Old Man. So it pays tribute to him for his change from dairy farming to wine. And my dad always tells the story that in his 50 years of dairy farming, nobody's ever come up to him in the street and said, Peter, last night I had a really, really great bottle of your milk. So yeah, cheers to wine and cheers to the fun and the bringing together that it does, and the good times. And I think the Old Man's Blend really pays tribute to that. So the white blend, the Sauvignon Blanc Chenin blend, predominantly Sauvignon. The red, a three-way blend of mostly Cab and Merlot, and then a little bit of Shiraz to add a bit of spiciness to wine. So not an overly oaked wine, just very light oaking on it, and drinking really, really well, basically in year one already. Yeah, then we move on to our, as I said, we do 3 Sauvignon Blancs. We've got our estate Sauvignon Blanc also in the lineup. The Sauvignons from Darling have got a real uniqueness about them. They got a distinct minerality that screams out Darling. It screams out West Coast. In fact, we've got a brand new wine called Sea Salter, which is actually named after a small town in England that I visited about 4 or 5 years ago. And it's a totally different label to other Groote wines. It's the label and the name epitomizes where we are in the Darling Hills, right up close against the cold Atlantic. A very unique area in that it's got this maritime influenced climate from the cold Atlantic that you don't experience anywhere else in the country. Producing whites with a marvelous minerality and almost a touch of saltiness to them, really, that makes them pretty special. The Sea Salter is what Lucas, our winemaker, has done there is it's a wine that appeals to Bordeaux blend kind of people that go for more of a Bordeaux blend. It also appeals to the Sauvignon Blanc enthusiasts because it's 88% Sauvignon and 12% Semillon. So it's got that touch of Semillon in. What also makes it very interesting, though, is that it's been aged, a certain portion, about 20% of the Sauvignon has been aged in new oak barrels for 4 months. So it's got that little bit of complexity from the oak, a little bit of a roundness. It's really an interesting wine, as I said, appealing to both Sauvignon Blanc enthusiasts and more your Bordeaux blend enthusiast, Bordeaux white. And it's been a wine that's been incredibly well received in all the markets that we work in. As I say, labeling completely different to Groote, really nice fresh labeling. Sea Salter epitomizing, our proximity to the cold Atlantic and that distinct minerality in our wine.
And don't be too modest, Nick, about the Sea Salter. It's just won an award, if I understand correctly.
Yeah, it's walked away with a couple this year.
Yeah.
It's got a 91 rating at the Global Masters, Sauvignon Blanc Masters, that was hosted by Drinks Mag in the UK, up against a lot of New Zealand and Chilean and Sauvignon Blancs from around the world. So we're really glad about that. And then obviously in South Africa, it's been top 10 in 2 different competitions.
Yeah, congratulations on that.
Yeah.
I've got a couple of questions in the queue here too. They're asking how Carl's asking how involved your dad is in winemaking these days.
Well, I got a telephone call from him first thing in the morning. Always wants to know what's going on. As I say, his great love is his cattle, so he's really concerned that they should be well looked after. But Lucas needs to get his nod of approval, certainly on the Old Man's Blend, before going to bottle. So yeah, it was, you'll line up a whole lot of samples and we'll pull the old man in for a little bit of blending.
Right, and John and Teresa were asking, is the oak French or New World? He hadn't heard what you were saying, and I do believe that was, you were talking about the oak, a little bit of oak on the sea salter, correct? Oh, have we lost you, Nick?
Sorry, yes, no, yeah, Lucas is using Burgundian oak on the sea salter, so yeah, French oak mostly.
Right, very good. All right, and if you want to touch just briefly on the Riesling.
Yes, yeah, Riesling has been an addition. We've probably been doing Riesling for about 6 or 7 years now, and it's a wonderful addition to the range in that it brings in a wine that's slightly off dry, incredibly interesting sort of flavors there in the Riesling that you know, that are very different to our other white wines. Also that off-dry offering, which is also different to our Sauvignon Blanc and the Old Man's White. And an amazing wine with some spicier dishes. In South Africa, we love our curries. We've got that Malay influence from India, that sort of cultural link that we've had for all the years. And pairing up Riesling with a really nice lamb curry or something is just absolutely amazing.
Well, I find it interesting that our editor actually put the pairing as apple pie, which I thought was interesting. Yeah, so I think that's really fun.
Yeah, I think we just eat too much curry. We probably don't even get to the apple pie.
Yeah, that's true.
But yeah, it's really yeah, it's an interesting wine. It's yeah, pretty sort of niche. We don't do a huge amount of it, but it's certainly got its following, and yeah, it's just adding a different dimension to the other whites that we do. Then also just to mention the two reds we have in the offering are the Merlot and the Shiraz. They both sort of aged in new and second full oak barrels, so longer aging in oak than what the Old Man's Blend would be. But you know, really, really great fruit flavors, and you know, wines that are sort of really soft tannins, drinking at a you know, very accessible at 2-3 years to drink. I think in Darling we have those sort of more sort of kind of accessible type of reds. They're not really wines that you can put them down for 5, 6, 7 years, but you know, you can certainly drink them at 2 to 3.
No, that's excellent. Well, thank you very much, Nick. I'm not seeing any other questions in the list here. Really appreciate that. I'm sure everybody's following along in their cellar offerings, but Groote Post starts at page 26 in the cellar offering and goes through the center spread as well with the 2 Old Man blends for our everyday drinkers. So thank you again, Nick. Appreciate it.
Thank you, Michael. Thank you.
And now we'll go to Bosman. We had an incredible visit there as well. Corlea is with us today. Thank you very much for joining us and taking the time, Corlea. There was a question earlier that I thought I'd leave for you, and that is, how long have they been making wine in South Africa? I bet you before you were born.
Oh my goodness, yes. I think the wonderful thing about South Africa is that some people almost see us as New World, but we're definitely very much almost Old World in terms of the Dutch settlers that came to South Africa and started making wine here. So 1652 was when Jan van Riebeeck came, and within a few years after that, he started with their first plantings and making wines here in the Cape. So our history in winemaking is rich and it's wonderful. But on the other hand, we must be very honest in that in terms of isolation of our country for such a long time, it's almost as if we've also gone through a new phase of starting making wines, let's say post-apartheid era as well. So it's this old history, and we carry that with us, but then also almost a new dawn and a new introduction into wine and people knowing about South Africa, which is quite recent. So that's the duality of South Africa, and I think we see a lot of that in our country. Yes, so I hope that answers the question.
That's brilliant. Thank you very much.
Yes. So I would love just to say thank you for giving us the opportunity to say hi from South Africa. Obviously, when you came to visit us and here in Wellington, it was such a wonderful thing meeting you all and being able to spend the day showing you beautiful sights on our farms. This is a little bit different. You're here in my home office. The kids are upstairs with my husband. They're having a braai. So different times, and we hope we do see each other in person quite soon again. But nothing keeps us from sharing wine. So telling you about the Bosman family, it's an 8th generation family story. I'm always quite taken by just what that means. At the moment, the 9th generation are all little boys and girls on that farm. I'm still waiting for them to grow up so that I can pull them into the cellar so that we can use them and that they can help start making wine. But my contribution to the wine story is that I started working for the Bosman family some 13 years ago in terms of their introduction into wine, because it's a strange thing. The Bosmans have been making, growing grapes and being involved in viticulture for 8 generations. But then in terms of wine history, in the 50s, there was a very specific time where wine making changed in South Africa. It was with the introduction of cold fermentation and let's say methodology from the Germans and from Europe, where South African wineries knew that they would need to adapt their winemaking techniques. So the Bosman family looked at this and they said, you know what, we've got this fantastic 260-year-old cellar. We've got this old cellar. We can make wine or we can focus on viticulture. And it was a very specific time in the history of Wellington and South Africa where viticulture was becoming very important, where vines and healthy vine material was important. So the Bosman family said, let's focus on viticulture. So the cellar was mothballed. It was closed since 1952. And all of our Upimium friends who came and saw the cellar, you would see that. I mean, I think the cellar wouldn't look the way it does today if there was modernization and if the wheels kept on turning. So in hindsight, it's always 20/20 vision. I think it's an amazing thing that the family was able to stop and, to mothball it and to focus on the important things. And in that step, it was very well. What happened then was that the Bosman family became the most preeminent nursery in the Southern Hemisphere. So the family grafts more than 10 million vines a year. And this is not only for the wine industry, it's also for the table grape industry, for raisin industry, but it's quite a feat. If you can imagine 10 million vines, which are all handled 50 times each by hand by our team before they're sold off to their end customer, to the farmers of our country. So, and that was the focus for a very long time. Then Petrus Bosman, our MD, he started, re-entering the idea of what do we do to get full circle again. We've got fantastic sites, we've got all of the viticultural know-how. How do we get back into making wines like his grandfather still did in the family cellar? So coincidentally, we were at university at the same time. After he studied, but he studied finance, he did a stint in the USA, came back, and he started making Cabernet on very small scale, like 3-4 barrels for his family. It was enough to tell them that they should start making wine again. And in 2006, we met. 2007 was the modernization and the re-entry into making wines in that old cellar again. So everybody who's been, you would know that the old cellar is now used for maturing our barrels. So all of the red wines in the offering, they are matured in that beautiful old cellar. And then onto that, a new facility was built, which gives us all of the technology and everything that we need to make wonderful modern day wines as well. So I think in a nutshell, that's the history of the Bosman family from 8 generations to the point where we are now. and the influence of viticulture and how important that is. But maybe the important thing is that we talk about the wines, because most of the stories come out when we talk about them. So the first part of the wines which are part of the offering are obviously the Generation 8 wines. I'm just going to grab one. Let's see. So this, for instance, is then our Generation 8 Chenin Blanc. In the offering, we have the Chenin Blanc, Merlot, Cabernet, and Shiraz. And I think these wines are important because they speak to the fact that it's called Generation 8, not because of the history, but because of the here and the now. I think it's important that people also know that, you know, we are a part of history and we're part of making things better. And these wines are those wines which speak about being dedicated to better. So wines, it's part of the Fair Trade Foundation. It's part of the family story of being a multiple ownership model. So in 2008, in one of the, well, in the biggest land reform transaction to date in South Africa, 26% of our farm was also transferred to ownership in terms of our workers. So there's a wonderful ownership in terms of people that's working on the farm. And we're talking here about a community of more than 500 permanent staff and their families who are entrenched in this business. So these wines speak about wanting a better life for all, not just for our community, but obviously also for our customers. We don't want people to drink more wine. We want people to drink better wine. And these wines speak to that. So commitment to community, commitment to environment, and these wines speak to that. So these are the offerings in terms of the Chenin Blanc, the Merlot, Cab, and Shiraz for the Generation 8 wines. So that's that. And then another thing which leads to stories of our business is a wine which is from the Hemel en Aarde Valley. So the Bosman family, obviously in Wellington since 1655, but in Hemel en Aarde since 2000. So for the last few years, being totally invested also in a beautiful seaside town called Hermanus. I hope when you come to South Africa and when we're able to welcome you to our beautiful country again, that you will go there. It is the most beautiful place to go and see whales and beautiful fynbos and proteas, and just a wonderful, inspiring place. It's also a wonderful viticultural area which is focusing these days on Chardonnay and Pinot Noir. So in the offering, we also have Pinot Noir, the Upper Hemel en Aarde Magnum Opus 2018. And it speaks from that specific site. And Pinot Noir, which is just such a beautiful wine, and which we're really excited about. I think the next wine that we can speak about maybe is single site expressions. So if you could think about a family, they're quite sentimental. So we were quite happy to learn that we have the third oldest Chenin Blanc vineyard in South Africa, which we're the custodians of. And we've been making wines from that site since 2007. In the olden days, this grape parcel would go into a cooperative cellar. The previous, the previous generations never knew what this wine looked like because it was never vinified separately. But we're able to now, for the last few years, see what an amazing site it is. So the Optenoord Chenin Blanc, so from the third oldest Chenin Blanc site in South Africa, very, very limited parcel, which is absolutely beautiful. Also fermented and matured in Burgundian oak and also in concrete eggs, and just a beautiful rendition of Chenin Blanc, which is such a national heritage grape for South Africa. Also an important section that we need to talk about is the two blends that we have. So the Adama white and red. So these are them. So Adama is the nickname of Adamopoulos, and he was the right-hand man of Petrus Bosman's grandfather. And he was also a community leader and very instrumental in the community that still lives and works on the farm today. So if we talk about 8 generations of Bosman family, we also have 5 generations of the Apollos family living on the farm, who is absolutely now also at the helm of what we're doing. These wines are fair trade accredited, and they're also part of the mixed case in the offering, and it gives you the opportunity to see the generosity of Wellington. So you were talking about
Corlea, can you speak a little more about the fair trade piece of the Adama, please?
yes. So fair trade is it's an important accreditation where it's year on year we get audited, and it's a progressive audit. Every year it becomes just more and more stringent, but it means that we're looking after 3 things: the financial aspect of trading, that we're ethically trading, that our community is being bettered because of it, and something which is mostly overlooked is that fair trade actually also looks quite heavily into environmental impact. So it's really wines which has sustainability at the very core of it. For each bottle of wine, there's a contribution that goes into a fund. This fund is managed by our workers themselves. They have a committee, they budget, they do tremendous things with the monies which are raised through the wine sales. And it is everything from computer centers into libraries, into transport, into healthcare, and to clubs. We have a women's club. We have a young club of kids doing karate. One of our girls, Shanine, actually went well, she's been all over the world. Actually, I'm quite envious in terms of her wonderful triumphs in terms of karate. I think it's just a wonderful opportunity for our community to take charge of their own destiny through the sales of these wines, but also through ownership, because as a winemaker being involved in the company for the last 13 years, it's been wonderful seeing how people stay in our company. We've got a retention of skills, we've got a retention of people who are keen to see where the business is going, because it has always been so positive. So these 2 wines are 2 blends. The white is a Chenin Grenache blend. The red is actually an 8-way blend, which is led by Shiraz Mourvèdre, Cinsault, Grenache Noir, Primitivo, Viognier, Tempranillo, and Nero d'Avola. And these blends actually tell you about the blends of people, and how when people work together, the sum of what they're busy with is just so much better. So I hope that answers your question there, Mike.
It does. That's great. And what have you got in your glass?
Oh, in my glass, actually, I opened a little bit of Pinotage, because Anais told me that in terms of the offering, the Bosman Pinotage would be the only Pinotage. And this was something we were busy with in 2016. So I love the fact that you'll be able to have a lovely matured Pinotage. It's a national heritage grape, obviously, as well. Cultivated here in South Africa in 1925, and it's a crossing of 2 very unlikely grapes. It's Cinsault and Pinot Noir, and the wines which are made of it are unique. It's definitely something which is so true to our country, and I think in the last few years, our winemakers have definitely gotten to grips with just how we're able to show the best of it. So the Bosman rendition definitely works and is focused on fruit expression, and then in the end, after some 18 months, what you can see as well is that we use some small barrels, and 2 to 5 liters and 500-liter barrels, a little bit of American oak, mostly French oak, but a beautiful matured and very fruit-forward wine. So in the glass, Pinotage.
Great, excellent. And I'm just going to interject for a quick moment. We've had several people who have said that they're still looking at Nick on the big screen, and that's a problem with iPad. Everybody, it's a known problem on Zoom with iPad, is that the first spotlight tends to stay as the spotlight. So we do try and reset it as we go through, so that the speaker is the one that you get. But unfortunately, there's very little we can do, but we're going to keep trying. And back over to you, Corlea, please. Thank you.
No problem at all. I'm just so sorry that in terms of I said to Anais that today I think I went to my hairdresser for the very, very last time in a very long time. But hopefully our guests, which are on iPad, they won't miss that. Anyway, so after the Pinotage, maybe also important is the fact that in the same category, in terms of these beautifully matured wines, we also have a Cabernet. Cabernet was very important for the Bosman family because Petrus's grandfather, I mean, if you look at the South African wine history, up until very recently, some varieties like Cinsault and Chenin Blanc were absolutely the stalwarts. So when Petrus's grandfather in the 50s made wines, he knew that Cabernet was like a modern day varietal. It came from Bordeaux, it was made famous in other places, and then it was used here in Wellington. And he knew if he added a little bit of Cabernet to his blends that he would get a better price. So when Petrus started making wines for the very first time, again in 2006, 7, he knew that Cabernet would be one of those grapes which he really wanted to try. And I think the Wellington rendition is fantastic. We do have ample sunshine. We were talking about you guys seeing some snow, obviously here in Wellington. A lot of people come here and they experience it maybe as the hottest thing that they've ever experienced. We see it as a wonderful blessing because we have fantastically, really lovely, ripe, generous grape flavors that we're able to bottle. So Cabernet is also part of the story. And then maybe just because of the viticultural influence, something quite impressive and wonderful is the fact that we have the only Nero d'Avola in South Africa. So this is part of the nursery story. Petrus Bosman ventured into Sicily to go and look at varietals which suited the South African, let's say, climate landscape. We have to be very honest that a lot of varieties that are grown here in South Africa have been made famous in different places. I'm going to be honest that something like Chenin Blanc and Cinsault definitely do extremely well here because they're so well suited here. And I would love to think that our viticultural history isn't finished yet, that we should look more and that we should explore which grapes with our new, if you think about climate change and how, water scarcity is such an important thing for South Africa. We went through 3 years worth, actually 4 years worth of a tremendous drought. And something like Nero d'Avola is just something which is going to be important in years to come in terms of resilience and grapes which do well in really dry areas. And then in the end also gives us wonderfully flavored and textured and powerful wines. So the Nero d'Avola, the only one here in South Africa, but then also part of the offering for Opinion.
Right. So I'll interject with another question here. Colette's going to ask you to choose your favorite child because she's asking if she could only buy one. Would it be the Cab Sauv, the Nero d'Avola, or the Pinotage?
You see, I have 3 children in real life too, right. And I would never ever, yes. I think in terms of maybe telling the story, if you needed to make a choice, I would do that Pinotage because it would be the only one in the offering, and maybe it brings you a little bit closer to South Africa and to delve into, just what we are. But oh my goodness, I wouldn't want to do that again. But let's say Pinotage for the moment.
There you go, Colette. And Paul is asking he's not familiar with Pinotage and how does it compare to a Pinot Noir? It's
very different. I think Pinot Noir brings a bit, well, obviously, there are so many different ways of expressing Pinot Noir as well. But if you take the idea that Pinot Noir is ethereal and sometimes lighter and brighter, Pinotage is definitely, and now I'm also making a wrong statement because the winemakers in South Africa have come to the conclusion that you can also put Pinotage in very different ways. You can have it fresh and fruity, and you can have it really concentrated and extracted. So, but I think if we needed to, make a point, Pinot Noir being this ethereal, lighter style, medium bodied and usually medium but full flavored. Pinotage being quite fruit forward, being quite robust. But in our case, I would hope to think that when you taste this wine, that it was made in such an elegant style that it would only be the palate weight and the color intensity which would draw you away from the fact that it actually has a parent being Pinot Noir. So we try and show as much as possible of that parent in this wine in terms of the elegance, but what you will see in the wine is that you can't see it now, but it is inky and it is really concentrated. So that would be the difference.
That's coming across very well, the inkiness in your glass there, actually. So that's good. Well, thank you so very much. Really appreciate it. And everybody following along, the Bosman wines start on page 32 in the Cellar offering. And we will now move over to Richard Kershaw, and he'll start talking about his wines on page 42. Thanks again, Corlea. And over to you, Mr. Kershaw.
Hi. Yeah, welcome. It's good to be here, and hope you can all hear me fine. But it's really, really great to be able to talk to everybody whilst you're enjoying your lovely winter. And
thanks
having a spot of summer here. So, yeah, I'll just kind of let's just kick us off a little bit. Yeah, I'm based in the Elgin Valley, and for those unfamiliar, it's a little region that's towards the coast, towards the south coast, about 50 minutes from Stellenbosch and about an hour and a quarter from Cape Town. So right on the seafront. And why I'm based there, actually, maybe to give a bit of history about the region, is that I am actually I came here in 2012 as a virtual winemaker. So basically, I was a winemaker previously for a well-known company, Bosch and Konu, and decided to leave to set up my own business. And to give you a little bit of background as to why I chose Elgin, probably gives me a bit of a chance to give a background of why I started actually making wine at all, to be honest, because I'm obviously not from here, as you can probably clearly hear. And my background is actually from being in the UK as a chef, and I was originally a chef and a retailer back in the UK in London, and decided after a few years, by the time I reached my mid-20s, that I felt there was a little bit more to life than that, and set off on a journey to make wine, which I did so starting in California and moving to a number of different countries before finally arriving in South Africa in the late 90s, 99 to be precise. And I worked here under the Bosch and others for the last several years, and eventually ran both the cellars of Konu and Bosch before starting this winery here in Elgin. Or rather, when I say winery, it's a virtual winery, but I'll come on to that in a minute, because more importantly, it was actually, so there's no real history. As I say, our venture started in 2012, and the reason it even started then was I came from, as I say, a sort of more quite an analytical background, and I was studying for the International Master of Wine. And for me, it was a little bit of a challenge in the sense that whilst I passed and everything, it was obviously that was a challenge. But with regards to doing the course, taking the actual environment that the course contains in the various countries that it's actually shown, it was a real revelation for me, because having made wine here at that point for about 7 or 8 years, it was almost disappointing when we tasted these wines blind often that in the terms of South Africa, we often were sort of seen as a sort of obviously a value-driven area, which is true, but not necessarily taken that seriously at the high end. And I always remember doing tasting notes, and we used to have to guess the origin and the grape variety and so on and so forth. But when it came to South Africa, it was sort of, or rather, when it came to any other country, we'd be looking at the region that it was made in, or the the area into a very, very delineated area, sub-region. And here in South Africa, it was like, well, if it's South African Chardonnay, that's fine. That's just South African Chardonnay. And I kind of made it a quest, because I was so tired of that that we need to try and really put regionality on the map here. And for me, we've just had some wines from Darling and Wellington. We need to be espousing those virtues so massively. And we tend to always try and make, we do make a number of different wines. So what I tried to do is look at Elgin, because for me, what was interesting, it was a very cool climate, the coolest there is in South Africa. It was an area that particularly interested me because the opportunity to make something very in a cool climate way, but perhaps at that time in a way that was something true to type or terroir. Not that you can't get terroir in any region, but the fact is that I just felt it was a possibility to try and push the ticket with regards to Chardonnay in particular, which I loved making, and try and really sort of break down the different aspects of Chardonnay in particular, and latterly Pinot Noir as well, to really understand what we were trying to achieve. And that meant that I spent a lot of time looking at my soils, obviously the climate itself, which to me is just a little bit more important than soils. Usually they say cool climate, the climate plays more of a part. In a warmer climate, perhaps the soils play more of a part, arguably. And certainly in our area, we felt the climate had a big impact because of its changeability. And to give you an idea, it's not that far from Stellenbosch, but we're a good sort of 6-7 degrees cooler during the day, any day of the year, really. So it really makes a big difference, even though it's only 50 minutes, literally, 50 kilometers. It's nothing really. So that was my one focus. And the second focus was looking at the different clones, because we had a number of variety of clones, some good, some less exciting, sort of propagated during the embargoes, so that some were good and some were less good. But the interesting points for me was to try and really focus and drill down into that terroir, just as you see in the rest of the in the rest of the world, or not the rest of the world, but in certainly the fine wine regions, where they're drilling down to really understand what they're trying to achieve. And in that trying to achieve moment, you are also garnering praise and value to your wine. So you can look at a higher value wine which has spent a little bit more time understanding it. And just to elucidate that, if you're in Burgundy, for example, they have their own dedicated university in Beaune, which is spending its time looking at all the different clones and varieties that are just in Burgundy, and Bordeaux does the same, and the same in places like Piedmont as well. So in a way, that's something I was really interested, because it's not just us as wine growers or farmers or so on and so forth. It's also having the university backup, which is so critical to me in terms of pushing the industry forward and trying to drill down basically in like a research sort of environment. However, I am here talking about a few wines. I see. I think I've just got the one wine, but I will come on to that in a moment. We seem to be a little ahead of time. So, and I do talk too much, so I apologize. ADHD.
I'll keep you in check.
Okay, cool. So yeah. So what happened was in 2012, I started my venture, and as a virtual winery, as I mentioned earlier, we have to rent cellar space out, and I use two different cellars. One to make my Chardonnay, one to make my Syrah, and one to make my Chardonnay, and the other one to make my Syrah. I didn't mention Syrah. I'm going to talk a little bit about that when we talk about the Syrah itself. But the idea being is that we buy all the grapes in from different places. I don't have my own vineyards. I actually do have a piece of land of 40 hectares, but never yet had it to be planted. And unfortunately, as a winemaker, one is not paid necessarily a good salary. So you end up having to sort of make it all happen by, slowly but surely. Your business model is to make wine in somebody's cellar. We will build a cellar one day, and we will also plant vineyards, and one day we'll have the whole caboot, probably when my daughters take it over, I don't know. At that time, I can just sort of sit there and look at them. So the idea is that as a virtual winery, we have the options to get the good grapes, use all the materials. And in fact, we're not just a custom crush I use. I actually have invested heavily in equipment. So I have two presses, a basket and a very nice Wilmus pneumatic press. And I also have 6 tanks, which I bought, and a special destemmer. When I say a destemmer, it's kind of it's one of these modern, I've completely forgotten what it's called now, but anyway, it does sort of sorting and all sorts of other stuff with different mechanisms, but important, and a vibrating table for that matter as well. But overall, we make use of two different cellars. I said Syrah is the third grape we make. We actually started making that in 12 as well. And the Syrah forms an important part of what I try and do, because while Chardonnay may be the most suited, Syrah is a grape variety that I love. It's one of my loves. And I grew up, as I mentioned earlier, in the UK. So I had great access to the Rhone, and we often went down there, and I actually visited the Rhone a number of times. But the thing is that a lot of the Syrahs here they're more that Shiraz style, which is great, lovely styles, often a little bit between Australia and here. But for me, I was looking for something interesting from a cool climate where you are capturing slightly higher levels of rotundone. And for those not familiar with it, and apologies, I'll get geeky in a minute, but rotundone is a sort of it's basically black pepper. It's that character that you get in certain grape varieties. But as the grapes ripen further, that black pepper disappears, and it becomes more of a blackberry flavor. So is the wine, and then it gets further to that more jammy style, which when you're picking at really high belling. So I was interested in that sort of interesting black pepper sort of style, or white pepper in some of the cooler years, and importantly, also in our region, in particular in Elgin, we get quite a lot of cloud cover and also high rainfall. But cloud cover, importantly, has a big effect on the ability to ripen grapes. When grapes ripen in bright sunshine, they are able to ripen very easily and freely with no real problems. But largely that's because one of the controls is something called absinthic acid. It's a form of, it's a trigger basically in your grape variety your grapevines that will push your berries to start promoting sugar. It's basically a process where grape varieties, it's a sunny day, so therefore, let's make hay, and the idea of the grapevine anyway is to attract the birds, not really for me to pick them. So the idea behind it is that the grapes are going to be filled with sugar on a bright day, whereas on a cloudy day, and it's triggered by UV light actually. So on a cloudy day, that UV light is filtered, so it's not able to happen. So on our region, we tend to have a lot more of that cloud cover, which is slowing down the ripening period substantially. And that means that even though we are picking the berries much later, usually we pick the Syrah towards the end of March and early April, depending on the season, we end up picking it with slightly lower sugar levels. In bricks terms, it's usually between 21.5 and 23. So we end up with about 13, a little bit just over 13.5 alcohol.
And Richard, shall we talk about the 6 wines that are in the cellar offering? And
sure, I can. Yeah. I was going to only
before.
focus on that GPS, so I can talk about all of them.
No,
So,
just wanted to briefly list the 6. You've got
sure.
the Pinot Noir and the Smuggler's Boot line, of course, and then can you perhaps say what the Smuggler's Boot, what your intention is? To us, we call that a sweet spot wine, where it's not everyday drinking, but it's also not one that you're putting in the cellar for 10 years before you drink it either, right? So.
Yes, no, we can talk a little bit about the smugglers. I've got a bit more about the Klein River, but that's absolutely fine. We'll throw onto the thing here. So basically, the Smuggler's Boot is a range that I started making actually for Epimium back in 14, I think it was, or 13 actually, to be fair. And the idea behind it was these were wines where I am able to source grapes from areas that I don't normally source, so from outside the Elgin region, not necessarily always, but also younger vines that are perhaps ones that I don't want yet because of the lack of structure for the older vines into the main Kershaw blend. And as I say, from outside new regions that we're playing with. And what we do is when we bring them into the cellar, they're all clonally defined, just like the Kershaw wines, but they are not, they're not necessarily going to be under Elgin. They will be under different Western Cape appellations. But the important thing is in the cellar, we can play with them. So even though we'll do the same techniques, we'll double sort the grapes if they're red, or we'll whole bunch press if they're white. Because basically we're doing a Chardonnay, Pinot Noir, a Sauv Semillon and a GSM. But in the tanks, what we can do is we can play around with fermenting and maturing in tanks. But more importantly, we actually mature often in eggs, and it can be ceramic. It can be more breathable eggs. We call them Apollo capsules. We also use flex cubes. and those are all able to breathe the wine in a different way and play around with different techniques, some without staves, some with a little bit of staves, to augment the flavor and complexity without necessarily having too much new oak. And that's quite critical for what we're trying to achieve, because these wines don't necessarily have the bigger structure. They are going to be easier to drink and earlier to market. So that's kind of one of the big facets of the Smuggler's Boot.
What's in the name? What? Yeah. Oh, you're just about to say so.
Yeah.
Yeah. What
No
about
problem.
the name?
Now, the name actually derives from a block of Syrah I started with in Elgin, in fact. And unfortunately, the owner decided, because he changed, actually ripped it up. But fortuitously, for the first 3 or 4 years, we were able to harvest these grapes. And the interesting part is that it has a history linked to the South African history, really, where during the embargo years, a lot of the vines were not allowed to be brought in, or you just couldn't bring vines in. So many of the more smarter farmers or cleverer farmers brought in cuttings, usually I suppose in containers, but actually there are stories that they were brought in small cuttings in boots that you could literally put into you could take the cuttings, they're usually very, very narrow, and you could put them into a boot, a bit of soil, a little bit of moisture, and you've got 2 of them, so you can stick them in your suitcase. So that was basically smuggled in. And what the interesting part of that is that this clone that I was using from this particular block of Syrah was called the Smuggler's Clone. And apparently it hadn't actually come from Europe, it come from New Zealand. But it just really struck me as a story that perhaps, whilst we focus on clones massively with a Kershaw, this was just an unknown clone. We've no idea what it was. So it's just called the Smuggler's Clone. And that's where the Smuggler's Boot came in. And as you can see, the vine growing out is a sort of a picture of where it did come from. So yeah, there's not a lot of that now, fortunately, because not all of them survived and not all of them were virus resistant. But that's kind of just a little bit part of that. So
Right,
that's
and
kind
then
of
onto your feature.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So basically, from there, we basically go to the 2 new wines that are on the offer. And as I mentioned just now, to give you an entree, the Kershaw wines are split into the clonal selection, which we've had on the offer previously, which are from Elgin. And then what I started doing is, as I mentioned just now with the Smuggler's Boot, is looking outside of the region and looking for these interesting pockets. Now, some of these pockets, of course, end up in the Smugglers, but some of them are just fantastic, interesting, and quirky areas that actually end up in their own particular range called the GPS. And at this point, there's there's actually 3 now, but there currently were on the market 2, which is a Chardonnay and a Chardonnay and a Syrah. Both these wines are actually now being, you'll be showing those. I've got the number for the Syrah here. It's 2280, because I was told
and Anais is going to put it up in the chat.
Oh, you got it all there, right?
Yeah.
Okay. And basically, the GPS stands for Grape Positioning System, and effectively, what that effectively is just a little bit of a tweak on the fact that these wines are. Oh, hang on. Have I got the right one here? No, sorry, the wrong one. These basically are different areas from outside Elgin, and in many cases, these are from very, very small appellations. And in a few in particular, these 2, these are from appellations that actually nobody yet actually uses outside of what I'm using. So for the Chardonnay, just to quickly mention that, it's from Klein River. Lower Davenhocks River. That was actually the photograph I had here. That is the Lower Davenhocks River. That's the vineyard I'm touching. That's the Pinot Noir, but there's some Chardonnay just down. That is called Lower Davenhocks. It's the only wine in South Africa that actually has the Lower Davenhocks part to it. So you can't find it. And this one, interestingly, on the offer that I'm talking about now, the 2280, that Syrah is from Klein River. So again, another very quirky area. It's on the way from Stamford to, which is itself a small region, to a very small region called Sunday's Glen, which is even more obscure. And this is on the way there. So it's called Klein River. As I say, it's the only the only wine using that appellation, because most people would use the Cape South Coast. It's a little more well-known. And that makes complete sense. But what I want to draw your attention to before we get a little bit into the source is, on the actual vine, you'll see, if I move slightly to my left, that there's a little decal. I'm not doing it right. Down here, which is actually from something called What 3 Words. So for all of those listening, it's a very good app to download. And effectively, we started teaming up with these guys. We're the first winery to do so, where basically this company had split the entire globe into these 3 by 3 meter squares. And in doing so, there's 4.5 trillion of them. As you can imagine, the Earth is a big place. And in each square is actually demarcated as 3 different words, which basically means that you can find them very easily. And that's the positioning system in a way. And what they've done is they've actually been extremely successful by using postal addresses, because unfortunately 70% of the world doesn't have a postal address. They just have a place on an unnamed road. And in this case, they were actually using it to put up little signs on top on little shacks in both India, Brazil, South Africa, and so on and so forth, where these 3 words, which I've got here, would indicate where your 3 by 3 meter little house was. And in my case, what I've done is I've simply used the 3 words to indicate where the Syrah comes from. Clearly, it's a vineyard, so it's a much bigger. But these 3 words in one of these blocks sounded quite fun. So you can plug that into your what 3 words, and you'll actually find where the vineyard is. And similarly, if you do it on the other wine, the Chardonnay as well. So yeah, that's quite fun. Also, what the last thing was also these signs that they use for these things where you put them onto the houses are actually all manufactured in South Africa, which I quite enjoyed, rather than being, manufactured over in China. It's actually something that at least we can do here effectively as a business. So yeah, that's where that comes from. So maybe if I just quickly go back to the wine. We're okay, aren't we? So
I'm going to give you a couple more minutes, Richard.
Couple more minutes, right? Okay.
Yeah.
So the wine itself is it's from a cooler region, not as cool as necessarily Elgin, but it's got that wonderful restraint, as I mentioned, that rotunda character. We have this lovely, as I say, black pepper character, very powdery tannins. It's a wine that you can definitely drink, because we tend to get a lot of Chinese 5-spice in the wine. But it's a medium weight wine with that sort of spicy character, but it's something that you can keep as well. And in fact, although I am drinking it, oh, hang on, here we go.
Don't move. You have to, you have to, if you hold it in front of yourself, yeah, that's better.
Yeah,
okay.
I can do that. I'm drinking it right now. Just to make sure that, So
we believe you.
We believe you. Okay, so yeah, the wine itself is a wine for 2017 is a great year. The tannins are much more seamless, finer, powderier, and also wines that will age. They've got a good acidity, and we certainly got that in our wines in 17 and 15 for that matter. So these are wines to go for the long term, and we do very little in the winery. So just like the Kershaw wines, from the clonal selection, we bring them in, we bunch sort, we destem, we berry sort. Nowadays, actually, we have our own automatic sorter, so we don't even need to berry sort much. And then what we do is we just we lift them into a open top fermenter. We do a punch down, although nowadays sometimes we do a délestage as well, or rack and return is the correct, the English terminology. And what we do is we leave them on the skins to start their own fermentation. All our wines that you have on the offer, including all the including 2 of the Smuggler's Boot, that's the Chardonnay and the Pinot, are all natural ferment. We don't use any yeast particularly at all. And therefore, what we try and avoid is we try and avoid acidity additions too clearly, trying to preserve that. And then what we find is that we keep these wines usually on the skins for the Syrahs usually for about 25 days. It depends, up to 29, 30 days actually in this year. But the fact is that what we tend is we leave them on the skins, they soften out, and then we basket press them. And then they stay and they go into barrel. The barrels are all obviously French origin. They're all from the center of France and the Corrèze. But they're all importantly fashioned by Burgundian coopers. Why that's important is I like the fact that, especially with the Pinot and Chardonnay, they have a little bit less toasting aspects to the cooperages. And we use all 228s, our PS as they're called, rather than Barriques. And the Rhone also we source from. Clearly, obviously, it's a Syrah at the end of the day. So yeah, that's kind of what we do. Just to give you an idea of how we do it, because obviously that's part of what I do as a taster, as a master of wine when I teach and stuff, is we taste every barrel every 6 weeks. We do a very religious way of doing it. And importantly, the barrel selection is we use an algorithm to actually match the barrels with the wine, because obviously this is from one particular block. But what we try and do is assess the barrels as they mature. So every 6 weeks, we write a tasting note, we give it a score, And we actually have a history of all the barrels that we've tasted over the many years. But importantly, we build a very timeous history over the period that they're maturing. So as you can imagine, we probably taste them about 10 times, if that's correct. I'm trying to work it out now. But whatever it is, basically to give an understanding of how it would work once we're taken out of barrel and when we take them out of barrel, because that's also critical. It's not like a regimental 16 months or 18 months. It depends on when they're ready to go. So,
okay,
so that gives you.
I'm going to stop you there, please, Richard.
All right, no problem.
If I may. No, thank you very much. And Mike Ratcliffe's been waiting patiently in the wings here. The Richard Kershaw wines start on page 42 in our catalog. Thank you very much, Richard. Really appreciate your taking the time to do this. Hang around. We'll do questions at the end as well. And is Mike Ratcliffe there from Velofonte?
I'm here, Michael.
There you are. Thank you for your patience, and it's over to you, sir.
Well, great. Hi to everybody. It's coming up to 10 past 10 on Saturday night in South Africa. My bottle of wine is finished because we have lockdown in South Africa. There's unfortunately, unfortunately, there's no more to be had. So it's a little bit of a dry evening here, but wonderful to be on the call. Hi to everybody. For those of you that don't know me, I'm the co-owner, co-founder, and managing director of Vilafonté Wines in South Africa. It's a family business owned by two families for almost 25 years. It's also a South African and American joint venture. We've been partners with Opimium for a very long time. I know that a lot of Opimium members are huge fans, have been supporting us for a long time, and we are very grateful for that. Also grateful that we've been able to develop such a wonderful relationship over all these years. The South African and American joint winemaking part of it is quite interesting because I partnered with two wonderful people that are still my partners today after 25 years. A gentleman called Dr. Phil Fries, one of the pioneers, one of the two founders of UC Davis School of Viticulture in Sacramento, and a lady called Dr. Zelma Long. Zelma was one of the pioneering winemakers, female winemakers of the world, certainly the one of two women to graduate in the very first class at UC Davis in enology. And so we have a pretty strong team. We've been working together. We co-founded Velofonte, and we've been going quite strong ever since. But there's also another very interesting angle, probably for the Opimium members, is the fact that my family is Canadian. And in fact, my sister lives in Toronto. My mother, who lives in South Africa, who's actually the first lady of Warwick fame, she's actually in Toronto at the moment on holiday. She'll be jetting back to South Africa on Wednesday, I believe. But so very deep Canadian heritage. You might not pick it up straight away from my accent, but certainly there is a little something there. I've got family right across BC, Vancouver Island, Alberta, and also up and down the East Coast. So there you go. That's a little bit of an introduction to me. We are absolute specialists. We produce only two wines and a second wine. We only produce Bordeaux blends. We are absolute specialists on Bordeaux blends. We also don't have, I was listening to my good old friend, Nick Pentz earlier. Hi, Nick. Always fascinating to hear some of the insights from Groote and Darling, but I was listening to the fact that Nick has got 3,000 hectares that they farm, and I've got 16. It makes things a little bit different, puts it into perspective. We basically, in the background behind me, this image that you can see right here is literally our vineyard. We have 16 hectares, all of it tight, high density, planted, only red varieties. And like I mentioned, Michael, we are a specialist. We produce 4 Bordeaux varieties, only red wine, Cabernet Sauvignon, Cabernet Franc, Merlot, and Malbec. And we don't do any varietal production. It all goes into our blends. And I'll speak a little bit about those wines when we get to it in a little while. Also some background for those of you that, when I said Zelma Long, you might recall that in 1973, she took over as head winemaker at Mondavi and was there for more than 10 years. She was there when Opus One was founded. and was involved in the very first vintage of Opus One, and also was the CEO of Simi Winery in California for 10 years. And my other partner, Phil Fries, actually planted Opus One in California. And if you look at my Facebook page, you'll actually see that just 2 nights ago, I was drinking a 1989 Opus One. It was spectacular. But I digress. So let's get back to the meat and potatoes, shall we? Velofonte the name Velofonte is very simple. It actually refers to the dirt. It refers to the soil on our property. If you look over my shoulder, right behind me, you might get a little snapshot of the dirt. But in South Africa, we have the oldest documented soils in the world. And the oldest of the oldest documented soils is actually a soil type called Vilafonté. And so that's where the name comes from. And once again, the name on our bottle is the dirt that we plant our soils in. So that gives you one little additional piece of perspective when you open a bottle of Velofonte and taste it. Perhaps you can get some sort of hint of the terroir. Our intention is very simple: to stay specialized. Our long-term goal is very simply ambitious. Our intention is to establish ourselves as a first growth of the Cape, if there is such a thing. And we are just trying every year to make ourselves better and better. And so that's where we are. There's a little snapshot of Velofonte. You can get much more information on our website too, velofonte.com. And I think now, Michael, if it's appropriate, I might talk about the wines.
Yes, absolutely, please. And I did want to mention, you mentioned your family, and your sister Jenny did write an article for us for this particular Cellar offering. So to everybody out there on page 52, that about the rise of South African premium wines, which just might have something to do with you, Mike, that she's written about that. So, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, Jenny's a great asset to have in Toronto. She's highly knowledgeable. She's a Cape wine master. She's got years of experience and somebody that really knows her stuff. I did read that article, and to everyone listening now, I would recommend take a look at it. It's a 2 or 3 minute read, but really gives you some good perspective, and also shows you some perspective on how Apimium has been sniffing out some of the great wines of South Africa. You know, Apimium is not a supermarket style retailer. You guys have the ability to go sniff out the good stuff, and I think, you know, your track record speaks for itself. But specifically, this offer at the moment has got a really wonderful selection of some great South African wines. It's difficult to pick a bad one, I have to say. So let's have a look at the three Vilafonte offers. And because we are a small winery, there are only 3. And frankly, there are only 2, but one of them is a slightly sneaky one. The first offer is offer number 2285. Michael, I'm sure you'll tell everyone what page it's on.
Yes, and we have this up on the chat as well with the lot numbers and the page numbers. Yours starts on page 50 and goes from there.
There we go.
Yeah.
There we go. Page 50, everybody. Find yourself there.
That's right.
So
we'd rather watch you, Mike.
Okay. Well, look, this is lot 2285 is the second wine from Vilafonte. It's a wine we've been producing for close to a decade now. It's taken on a life of its own. And very simply, for those of you that are familiar with the Bordeaux vinification model, we follow the same kind of model. You know, we produce the grapes on our property. They come into the winery. They get vinified in exactly the same way. All the wines go into barrel, the same winemaker, the same winery. And after a year, we do a barrel selection, after which the blends get made. And any wines that perhaps come from younger vineyards or wines that are not showing the gravitas which we would deem appropriate for example, the Series M, would be declassified into our second wine. So it's quite a well-accepted model around the world. And so our second wine is actually called Seriously Old Dirt. So I've got 2 interesting things to tell you about this wine. The first one is that it's a bit of a wacky name, I guess. We've become so used to it that we don't think it's wacky anymore, but people all around the world kind of raise at least one eyebrow when they hear about a wine called Seriously Old Dirt. But the story is rather interesting, is that a number of years ago, more than a decade, my partner Phil Fries was in Baltimore, and the story goes that he was having dinner with Robert Parker with the intention on doing an interview about the viticulture at Vilafonté. And the story goes that Phil Fries, Dr. Phil Fries, with a PhD in soil microbiology, spent so much time talking about the soil that, and the very old soil, which in his thick Midwestern accent, he describes as, it's seriously old dirt, man. Well, eventually Robert Parker actually had to say to him, okay, well, Phil, that's great. We love your soil. What a great story. But maybe we could talk about the wine a little bit. And so seriously old dirt, the name became folklore in our tiny little circle at Velofonte, and eventually we christened our second wine as seriously old dirt. It is a classic Bordeaux blend, just like our other wines. It is a Cabernet dominant blend. All the information will be in front of you, but it's in excess of 85% Cabernet. I don't remember the exact percentage, but I'm sure the information is in front of you. But here's the second interesting point about this wine, is that Opimium.
Uh-oh. I don't know about anybody else, but he has frozen on me.
Yeah, me too.
Yeah. So let's just give it a moment to see if we can get Mike back. Oh,
Have you lost me?
I think you've started to move again. Yeah, we lost you for about a minute there, Mike. You were just talking about the 85%.
No.
Yeah, but you're just talking about 85% cab in the 2285 Serious Old Dirt, and you were dead on. So you can continue from there.
So sorry about that. Perfect. Well, that leads me straight into the second thing that I think is important about the Seriously Old Dirt, is that Opimium will be the first people, your customers, Opimium, and all of the members out there across Canada, will be the first country in the world to receive the new 19 vintage. We'll be shipping it to Opimium early this year, and you guys will be receiving it 2 to 3 months before anybody else in the world. Also, Jane was the very first person outside of our cellar Jane Masters, that is, was the first person outside of our cellar to ever receive a sample. So there you go. Opimium, Canada, we love you guys. What do you say, Michael?
And I say thank you so very much. There. That's very kind. Yeah, we are.
Excellent.
We
so
are.
If anyone has any questions,
we are fortunate to have them. Yes, and I will mention very briefly the M series vertical case as well. I've noticed some people on the call live close to me here in Kitchener, Ontario, so they know that before COVID, I would have people over and do tastings of such things as verticals. And I can't wait to have yours in the wooden case and do a very ceremonial opening of it, and it'll be a great deal of fun. So that's great. Carl did say that if South Africa does get that system, you are definitely going to be Premier Cru.
Thanks, Carl.
Yeah.
Well, look, just to finish off, Michael, because I guess it's been a long evening. The lot number 2287 in the catalog that you just referred to, the 3 vintage vertical of Velofonte. It's 2 bottles each of the 2014, 2015, and 2016 vintage of Vilafonté Series M. And actually, Sophia, that is part of my team, made me stress that these are not just randomly selected vintages. These wines represent a run of 3 vintages that we consider to be the start of the time that Series M really came together after about 20 vintages. And specifically, these 3 vintages are ones that were hand selected. This 3 vintage vertical is not available anywhere else in the world. It is only available through Opimium. It does come with deep, in-depth tasting notes and comes beautifully packaged in a beautiful handmade wooden box. It's certainly something for the collectors out there. It's certainly something that we as a winery are extremely proud of. And I hope that it's a wine, or let's say a little vertical, that gives a lot of pleasure. And with that, I think that probably brings me to the end of what I wanted to say today, Michael. I just think if I can close by saying to everybody that just because we're on the other side of the world from Canada, it doesn't mean that we have to be strangers. Velofonte has a very active social media presence. We like to tell stories. We're continually updating our friends and family, colleagues and clients around the world about what's going on in our vineyards. And so I would actively encourage you to reach for your phone right now. If you're on Twitter, it's very simple, @Velofonte, Instagram, @Velofonte, Facebook. Hell, if you're on WeChat, it's also @Velofonte. Please do reach for your phone and follow us and stay in tune, and also communicate with us. Take a picture, post it, tell us about it. We'd love to hear. But most of all, to Michael, the Opimium team, and to all of your wonderful members, thank you for all the support. We really appreciate it. Thank you.
Yeah, and thank you, Mike. We really appreciate it. And there was a question specific to you, was the comments on the difference in those 3 years that are in the vertical case. Would you like to speak about that, about what we're going to find when we taste the three together?
Yeah, it's a little tricky to slice it up into sound bites, because each wine is a symphony. It's difficult to describe each one in just a few words. But if I were to go backwards, I would say that the wine that probably has got the one that you want to have in your cellar in 15 years time, possibly 20 years time, is the 2016 vintage. It's a wine of intense structure. It's a wine from a vintage that probably wasn't as heralded as the other two vintages, but also a wine that I think is the keeper. It's more structured, intense, concentrated. The 2015 comes from what is arguably certainly one of the two greatest vintages of the decade, possibly competing with 2017. It's difficult to say. They have slightly different qualities about them, but 2015 was a wine where we received remarkable ratings, a lot of and it was the vintage that sold out quickest in our history. So there you go. It's a wine of opulence. And then the 2014 is probably the one that you want to drink earliest. It's a wine that's got softer tannins, more integration. It's very ripe and rich. It will certainly reward you if you keep it 5 to 10 years, but it's also one that if you get inquisitive, you could crack a bottle and not wrap yourself over the knuckles. But you know, have some patience.
Yes, right.
Yeah, have some patience. Just because we're sending you wines that are 7, 6, and 5 years old, respectively, doesn't mean that you have to drink them. We just started the aging process for you. These wines are not over the hill. They will go comfortably another 10 years. But don't wait 10 years to crack one or two. Right. Try them. We think they're in pretty good nick.
No, that's marvelous. We're getting some great comments about how much they love your wines and your presentation. So thank you very much, Mike. And if anybody has any other questions, please put them in now, because we'll wrap it up fairly soon here. I'd like to thank everybody who's joined us today, our Opimium members, for being on the call. And then also Nick from Groote Post, and Corlea from Bosman, and Richard Kershaw from Richard Kershaw, and Mike from Vilafonté. I can't tell you how much I enjoyed listening to all of you, and we really do. This is the essence of Opimium, is connecting people to the producers, and these Zoom calls absolutely do that so well. It's terrific. So Mike's posted some of his information there for you. We have recorded this, and thank you, Anais, again for doing this. This is going to be recorded and posted, so people can look at it if they wanted to see some of the information again. And I will remind you. Oh, I promised to talk about the master's case, which is from Bosman this year. And so the way that works is that there will be 3 of the wines that are offered in the catalog. We won't tell you which 3. There will be 2 bottles of each of those 3 wines in the master's case. And then when the wines arrive in Canada, the beauty of the master's case is that Jane is going to do a live virtual tasting and explain those 3 wines to all of you. one thing I have to say is that if you want to be in the master's case program, you'd better hurry, because we're very much hitting the top end of our available cases in that program. Very similar to Founder's Choice as well. So if we do top out, we're going to start a waiting list. So make sure you sign up when you can, and we really appreciate it. So thank you again, all 4 of you, for joining us. Thank you, Anais, for running this, and we will see you all on the next one.
Thank you, Michael.
We'll see you later.
Thank
Okay,
you.
Thank you. Okay.
Thanks
Bye-bye.
very much.
Bye, guys.
Thank you, Michael. Cheers.
Everybody, that was awesome.